morning, everybody. We got another great show ahead for you guys. On tonight's show, former lobbyist and convicted felon Jack Abramoff is going to tell us how you buy politicians and how the system is broken. And then comedian Dean Obeidallah is going to ask, hey, if God is behind 4 different Republicans, who's he really supporting? It seems a little confusing. We'll try to sort that out. And then finally, Bill Maher got in some trouble for a tweet that he sent about Tim Tebow. We will certainly be talking about that as well. Joining me on the panel is Richard Eskow. He's with Campaign for America's Future, blogs at Huffington Post, one of their most popular bloggers there. And Kasparian, fellow host at the TYT, also the host of TYT University, also seen on Current on the Young Turks. Michael Shure, seen daily on Current as well with the Young Turks, and the host of 2012 on the TYT network. We've got a lot of hosts here. So let's get started. First point sent in by Jack Abramoff, former lobbyist and convicted felon, let's be honest, but he knows how to fix the system, and basically he's going to tell us how.
Hello, my name is Jack Abramoff, and thank you for having me on The Point. You know, I used to be a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I used to work on K Street, and we used to all go up to Capitol Hill to get everything we wanted for our clients. Many of our clients and many of the clients in Washington are the special interest, and some are the general interest. But the fact is, lobbyists have far too much ability to sway members' votes. And one of the reasons lobbyists have such a great ability to sway members' votes in Congress is because many of those congressmen want to eventually become lobbyists. Now, they may not call it lobbyists, they may call themselves strategic advisors or history professors if they're a certain fellow who's running for president. But the fact is, the cashing in on their government service is something that Americans are getting sick of. And whether it's a congressman and senator, or whether it's a staffer, somebody who comes to serve the public needs to serve the public and then go home and get a real job, not come to Washington, stay in Washington, and earn millions of dollars. Americans are sick and tired of seeing people arrive here worth $10,000 and leave worth $10 million. Some of it, and this is perhaps an even sicker part, is done while they're in office. Others is, frankly, after they leave office, they're able to make a fortune. And I think Americans resent that because they're making a fortune off of the public service. So I believe, and I've written in my book, Capital Punishment, which has come out, that this needs to stop. We need to close that revolving door, and we need to forever shutter it so that Americans once again have faith in their government, and Americans don't view their Congress with a 9% approval rating. There are frankly few occupations in this country that have a 9% approval rating. Congress doesn't know why that is. We need to tell them why it is, and one of the reasons that it is because they're cashing in. I hope they'll stop. Thank you very much.
I didn't think that the day would come when I would say I totally agree with Jack Abramoff, but I do, Anna. And how much do you think the American public is aware of what he's talking about here?
Well, if you asked me this a year ago, I would tell you not really aware at all. But as he had mentioned in that video, Congress has a 9% approval rating at this point, which is like a record low. And also think about all the Occupy movements. You know, if you watched independent media interviewing these Occupy protesters, a lot of them mentioned this very issue. So I think that more and more people are catching on to it. But I think the problem is the reason why the majority of Americans don't know about this issue is because the media is either clueless on it or they want to protect their corporate interests and not say anything about it. You know, my mind goes back to a month ago when he had an interview with Leslie Stahl. And during that 60 Minutes interview, he was telling her, yeah, I bought Congress. That's what I did. And I did it all the time. And Leslie Stahl was like, really? She was so amazed by that. And it's like, really, you are a journalist. You are a very respected reporter. You don't know that that's going on. I don't know if she was playing stupid or if, you know, they're really that clueless about it.
Well, it brings to mind 2 things, right? One is, I remember when Rick Sanchez did a similar story, like back when he was still hired by CNN, and he did a story about, hey, look at this. These senators that are voting on the health care bill are actually getting paid a ton of money by the health care lobby. And he was like, whoa, right? But at least he did the story. He's the only guy on CNN I've seen do a story on that. When Michael, I think that's the driving issue. So Leslie Stahl's like, what? You influence congressmen? And Rick Sanchez is blown away and no one else covers it.
And there are legitimate routes to lobbying. I mean, lobbying started, history says that it started in the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., is that in the 1800s, people used to go in there with their interests, and the congressmen and senators would come into the lobby, literally, and they would have their conversations about about what they wanted to see done there. It got obviously perverted along the way. Something happened to the process that totally changed it. And you know, you don't agree with Jack Abramoff. Jack Abramoff now agrees with you, and there's a big difference there. People have started to come around. It takes a whistleblower sometimes to see that change happen, but you know, he doesn't come up with a cure for it. And there are lots of people who discuss what the cures would be for it. But you know, you have to be able to have that First Amendment protection as well as not have it be sort of bastardized by the lobbying the way it is now, the system the way it is now.
Richard, I have a theory as to when some of that change began that Michael's referring to. Late 1970s, couple of Supreme Court decisions, Buckley v. Vallejo, and then another one where they say not only does money equal speech, but corporations have the right to speech, right? And that's before Citizens United. Now, Citizens United said they can spend unlimited money on PACs, so that just put it on steroids. But at that point, look, we've always had rich people, but corporations have unlimited money that they could bring into the process. Didn't that really go a long way towards corrupting it?
Oh, it's all about the money. That's really what it's all about. And absolutely. So, you know, I mean, even if you think about guys who aren't openly corrupt, like maybe there's a Democrat you kind of like, he goes to Washington, all of a sudden after 2 or 4 years, he's one of those types of corporate politicians. They spend their whole lives raising money from these people. And these lobbyists are the guys with the money. They're the guys they have to please. They're being programmed day in and day out to make these people happy. And when I worked for Wall Street companies, I dealt with some of the, you know, the lobbying divisions of the large corporations, and it was just mind-boggling what you'd see, just even my little glimpse of it, that they just have to chase money night and day.
And you know what Richard says is true, but just by changing campaign finance law, while the two are related, that's not going to change lobbying law. That's not going to change what happens. So say you change campaign finance law, say you overturn Citizens United, you're still going to have the corruption of lobbying. You're still going to have people going to Capitol Hill forgetting how much they can give to a campaign or to a super PAC or anything like that. They're still going to be paying these people to try and be strategists, to try and go up to the Hill and influence the votes.
But that's exactly what Abramoff is talking about.
Yeah.
And actually, it's was part of my original proposal for WolfPAC. You know, we've set up a super PAC to try to get money out of politics. I dropped this because it's just too hard, and maybe we'll come back to it another day. But it was what he's talking about here, and it's, I would have put a 10-year lobbying ban on anyone who works in Congress or as a congressman, senator, president, or as a staffer, or as a general in the Pentagon. Right? Because those guys go back and then get huge money from the defense industry.
When Obama went to Kansas with the site of Teddy Roosevelt's speech, if you've read Teddy Roosevelt's speech that he gave in Kansas, he said nobody who works in government, elected or unelected, should ever work directly or indirectly for corporations, that they should be two completely different career tracks. And so I agree with Michael in that sense, but just overthrowing Citizens United wouldn't be enough. Until we have publicly funded elections, it's going to be a broken system.
Yeah, and you know, when it comes to the revolving door of politics, Senator Bennett tried to, pass this act that would ban exactly what you mentioned right now, members of Congress from either retiring or serving their terms or getting elected out of office and then going to work for a corporation or a lobbying group. And what happened with that act? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, here's what happened. Nada, okay?
Right.
Bupkis. Now, let me give you guys just some examples of the people who have done this to give you a sense of how bad it is. Here are the guys who are now employees of Goldman Sachs or paid consultants for them after they left office. Arthur Levitt, former chairman of the SEC, which is supposed to regulate these guys. Judd Gregg, former senator from New Hampshire. Dick Gephardt. Now, Judd Gregg's a Republican. Dick Gephardt, of course, a very powerful congressman for the Democrats. Richard Roberts, former SEC commissioner. Again, Greg Craig, who was one of the good guys in the Obama administration, now working for Goldman Sachs. So, I mean, are you not influenced by the fact that you might get paid a tremendous amount of money? And of course, the guy who's the best example, Billy Tauzin. So he starts as a Democrat, but he doesn't give a damn. He eventually switches to Republicans when they're in power. They're doing the Medicare prescription bill. He writes the bill totally in favor of the drug companies, leaves office, gets $2 million from them. And then he finally left as the head of the pharmaceutical company's lobby just this past year. When he left, he got, I couldn't believe this number, $11.6 million. Now, when you have that kind of financial incentive, Michael, of course you're going to think about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you also have, there's another side to the story. I mean, there's the people that would argue that there has to be some way for these public servants, and go with me for a second here, people who go to Washington who give up these big salaries. Billy Tozan maybe could have worked for Goldman Sachs many years previously, takes a federal wage, and then he wants to come out into the real world and make some money. A lot of these people never made money in their lives until they leave Congress. There has to be a way of giving them a boundary as well, where people can go to Congress and then can get a job. Just doesn't have to be a job where you go lobby Congress. That's all. You just can't have anything to do with strategizing or lobbying. And that should be simple.
They make, what is it now, $173,000 a year? That's not millions, but it's not nothing.
No, it's not nothing, Richard, but there's a certain level of money that a lot of people want to make, and a lot of people that go into business. Service. Well, why? But that's wrong. You know, of course, be a public servant. Why can't you be both? Why can't you be a public servant?
Because we've got a huge issue of systemic corruption here. What Jack Abramoff did that was illegal is not nearly as bad as what he did that was legal, right? Yeah. So, Michael, I understand what your concern is, right? And sure, we can set up the right boundaries. So we can say, you know what, you want to work at your law firm back in your home state, that has nothing to do with Washington. Of course you can do that, right?
Yeah.
But I would rather err on the side of caution and say they can't do anything that relates back to Washington. Well, and then say, hey, you know what, that might screw a couple of honest guys that would have normally gotten a job, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean, we got to fix the system.
I'm not saying anything very differently. I'm just saying that you should not be allowed to lobby or be part of any kind of a strategic enterprise when it comes to speaking to Congress or dealing with Washington. It should not restrict you from going to work for Goldman Sachs just by virtue of the fact that you served in Congress, though.
You know, I would probably stretch that definition longer than you would, but I understand your point. The one last point on this, so the audience gets a clear sense of why they do all this lobbying, why they buy all those politicians. The oil industry spent $110 million lobbying last year. Now, that's a lot of money, right? What do they get back in oil subsidies alone, let alone every other benefit that they get? At least $24 billion a year. You put in $110 million, you get back $24 billion. That's why you buy these politicians.
And you're excluding the tax breaks they get as well when you talk about that.
Our next point comes from the Dean of Comedy, Dean Obeidallah, and he's got an excellent question about which side has got on in the Republican race. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm comedian Dean Obeidallah, and thanks for having me on The Point. Here is my point. Why in this presidential campaign, with Republicans fighting each other, and the unbelievable media coverage, why is there one issue not talked about? And that is God. And I don't mean God in general. I mean the fact that 4 of the presidential candidates running, now there's only 3 left of the 4, all said that God told them to run for office. Rick Santorum, Rick Perry, Michelle Bachmann, and Herman Cain all said God told them to run for president. Yeah, yes, the same God who created the earth and said, let there be light, and there was light, told these 4 people out of over 300 million Americans to run for president. Why does the media not ask a question like, are you crazy? Let's be quite honest. If I said, tonight I'm staying home because God told me to stay in and watch Glee, people slowly back away from me. But if you're running for president and you're going to have your finger on the button that could result in the apocalyptic destruction of our planet, it's okay to say God talks to you. And here's the weird thing to me. Only Republicans say God talks to them. Pat Buchanan said it, George Bush said it, and these 4. Apparently GOD loves the GOP. But there are questions I have. First of all, why does God not talk to Democrats? God knows they need their help. Second, and the bigger question, if God is going to speak to these 4 candidates running for office, why does he not give them the right answer to the questions? They make mistake after mistake. Look at Rick Perry. November 9th debate, couldn't remember the 3rd government agency he wanted to eliminate. There was a guy dying for divine intervention. Michelle Bachmann, not knowing where the revolution started, thinking the founding fathers tried to end slavery, and of course Herman Cain, you think God will remind him that he was having a 13-year affair with a woman. You know, perhaps. So my question for you is, shouldn't the media be asking people questions? If you're going to say God spoke to you, when did he speak to you? What did he tell you? Should we be concerned that you have voices in your head? Thanks. I'm Dean Obeidallah, and you can follow me at deanofcomedy.com.
Well, Michael, obviously I agree with Dean. And it seems that whenever God talks to anybody, he either tells them to shoot someone or run for president.
Right. Exactly.
He never says, like, do your laundry.
No. And if you were Michelle Bachmann, wouldn't you be pissed that God also told Rick Santorum and Rick Perry to run? Like, wait a second, God.
Wait a minute, I thought
Why'd
we
you
were
tell me to run?
right?
What were you thinking?
I thought we were right there.
What's going on?
Richard, what's your theory here? Is God not? Is he just spreading out his bets just in case with these four? Or isn't he supposed to know how this movie ends? Why is he messing with the other three?
Well, a lot of people don't know this about God, but he's got a great sense of humor. And he just thought, why don't I mess with these people? Why don't I tell them all to run and see what happens? That's why the theme song for the Republican debates is "What If God Were One of Us?" Did you know that? No. Look. Who knows? I grew up in two different religious traditions, or I was exposed to two. And one of them, they said very clearly, if you talk to God, you're devout. If God talks to you, you're psychotic. That was one, and these people have broken that rule. But then there was the other, the sort of fundamentalist Christian world where, I had a relative, she and her fiance couldn't decide if they really wanted to get married. And they said, well, we sat down and we had a talk with Jesus about it last night. Now, they're not schizophrenic. They know that they didn't literally talk to Jesus. So there's that metaphorical thing. But yeah, if God told all these people to run, he's a hell of a kidder.
And with Michelle Bachmann, there was, first God told her to listen to her husband, and
to be submissive, right?
To be submissive to her husband, who apparently is interested in other people being submissive to him. But anyway,
God telling someone to watch Glee.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyway, hey everybody. And then he told her to be a tax lawyer, and then apparently God changed his mind. And here's what Bachmann said: "If I felt that's what the Lord was calling me to do, I would do it. But I will not seek a higher office if God is not calling me to do it." But apparently at some point he picked up his cell phone and was like, "Michelle, it's go time."
Yeah.
Right? But then he called Herman Cain and said, quote, this is from Herman Cain, not God, "I prayed and prayed and prayed, and when I finally realized that it was God saying that this is what I needed to do, I was like, Moses? You've got the wrong man, Lord, are you sure?" So he's like, "I'm like Moses, and I think you got the wrong man." And it turns out he did have the wrong man.
Yeah, exactly, he had the wrong guy.
Right.
I think it just doesn't speak well of the country when, as a political candidate, if you mention that you have a close relationship with God, that God talks to you, you're immediately taken seriously. Like, it is something that you need to say, right? And the religion part of politics is the part that really gets on my nerves, because I don't care what kind of relationship you have with God. I want to know whether or not your relationship with God is going to affect me. Does that mean that you're going to be up in my uterus telling me what I can and can't do with my reproductive health? Does that mean that you are going to, change comprehensive sex education in schools? If that's the case, then I want to hear about your religion. Otherwise, I don't care if God is talking to you, and I don't care if you pray. I don't care about it at all. And it's interesting because if you are a Mormon or if you have a different religion, immediately you are cast off, right? So Mitt Romney gets a lot of grief because of the fact that he's a Mormon. So did John Huntsman.
Right.
So.
And look, that brings up a second issue, which is, imagine if they said, instead of, "Hey, I talked to God and he told me to do it," they were like, "Yeah, so I talked to Allah the other day and he told me, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, run for office." Do you think that would work?
This playing field is that you're in a country that is at least 75% Christian. So if you're running for, Congress in Massachusetts, you're not going to say you're a Yankees fan. You're not going to do the same. You're not going to say you're all about Allah if you're here. And I did a little digging into the idea of talking to God. And the way it is equivocated is that people say that this is their calling. In the same way a chef would say, "This is my calling. This is what I'm here to do." Michelle Bachmann and her ilk are saying, "This is my calling. My calling is to run for president." So we could say it's God talking to them, but they're looking at it in a very religious way, that this is what I've been sent to do, which does, I'm not, I still think it's wacky, and I understand.
It's code talk. I mean, it's their coded message to their base saying, "I'm one of you, I speak your language." But you think about it over history, the people who were really religious and involved, Gandhi never said, "I talked to God last night." Martin Luther King never said, "I talked to God last night."
He'd been to the mountaintop.
He'd been to the mountaintop, but he didn't say, God, maybe he did.
No. What he would say is, look at the example of Jesus.
Exactly.
And here's a guy who is my hero of all time, Martin Luther King Jr. Very religious guy, very, has tremendous amount of faith. That isn't the problem. The problem is, as you were pointing pointing out, Richard, for somebody to come and say, no, I talked to the Picard, and the Picard says to do this, an old Star Trek reference. But seriously, how do you...
But he was
look, I get it.
He wasn't running for president. He was a reverend. He could say those things as a reverend.
And he didn't even say that.
And he didn't even say, I mean, he said a little more than we're saying that he said, but certainly he wasn't running for president. Somebody running for president it's separation of church and state. Martin Luther King didn't have to worry about separating anything from anything. He was a reverend.
And the other point is that, look, I get the faith part that you're talking about, Michael. Like, people just, it's a way that they say it. They're like, I talked to God, or
Totally.
And it's the way of saying that they thought about it and they wanted to make sure that they did the right thing. But when they get so specific on what God wanted them to do, then I get to thinking, like, how do you know? Are you sure he didn't mean that you should be a plumber? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, by the way, that marriage between my relative, my relative and her husband, that didn't work out either. God gave bad advice in that case too. You know, I think it's a way also of not taking responsibility for yourself. You know, you and I, we first met because we disagreed a little bit about atheism. But I think when people say this, they're not taking responsibility for their own decision. They're saying, well, don't blame me for running. God told me to do it. Well, you know what? You're trying to be leader of the free world. Why don't you take responsibility for your decisions?
I like that. Answer.
You know, Richard and I had dueling blogs because I came out really strong against religion, and you fought back on that. So it's funny that we're talking about it again many, many years later. But last point I have on this is something that Anna mentioned and Richard had alluded to. Look, it's one thing when they get into your business, as you said, get into your uterus, which was interesting and somewhat uncomfortable. Okay, but to me, the thing that I care most about is this whole idea of the apocalypse, right? So you've got these Christian fundamentalists who think, well, the way Jesus is going to come back is if we start Armageddon. Now, if you're talking to God, and remember Bush said, according to Jacques Chirac, he said, Gog and Magog are coming out of Iraq and we need to go fight them. And Chirac said, who the F is that, right? I don't know what this guy's talking about. But if you're starting wars or you want Armageddon to come about because of your fundamentalist beliefs, then we got a real problem. All right, for our next point, we're going to go to Bill Maher. He wrote a tweet about Tim Tebow. Of course, Bill Maher is the host of Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO, and he's a comedian. Apparently, people can't figure that out based on his tweet, so I wanted to fill you in on that. And then, of course, Tim Tebow, for those of you who don't know, hey, welcome to America, is the quarterback for the Denver Broncos, and he prays a lot. Tebow's on the sideline, oh, Jesus. So he was getting his ass kicked by the Buffalo Bills on Christmas Eve and had thrown about 18 interceptions when Bill Maher tweeted out, wow, Jesus just fucked Tim Tebow bad. And on Christmas Eve, somewhere in hell, Satan is Tebowing, saying to Hitler, hey, Buffalo's killing them. Now, I found this amusing in several different ways, but apparently a lot of people did not, and now they are thinking of boycotting HBO to get Bill Maher off. What do you think, Richard?
Well, I think that Bill's only mistake was that he forgot that old adage, the Lord fucks those who fuck themselves. And if you saw that game, especially the fourth quarter, you know that Tebow did it to himself. So, I mean, that's number one. And number two, I'm sick of Tebow's religiosity. You know, I've always been the religion of it. Remember when he used to wear the eye black with the Bible verses on it?
Right.
It's not going to work. But this is Matthew. It's not going to stick. This is chapter 6, verse 5. Okay, that's me doing my Tebow.
What is that?
And if you don't remember it, I'll read you a couple excerpts from it. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray in the streets and be seen. But when thou prayest, enter in thy closet, shut thy door, and pray to thy Father in secret. Now, Tim, you should read your Bible a little more often, especially this verse, because if the Lord came back tonight, he'd say, Tebow, put a sock in it.
As Anna pointed out before, how many people are following this guy who's starting the boycott?
Okay, so the person who called for the boycott is this no-name guy. In fact, he's such a no-name guy, I forget his name right now. And he literally only has 70 followers on Twitter. So I don't know how Fox News found his tweet, but they took his tweet and they blew it up into a big story. This is not a controversy. No one's boycotting Bill Maher. In fact, his demographic loves that tweet. You know, so it's not a big deal. And going back to Tim Tebow's religiosity, right? I think that it has kind of become the thing that identifies him, right? It is his identity, right? This is what made him unique, and this is why he's constantly in the spotlight now. He's the religious guy. He's the guy who did the anti-choice ad, during the Super Bowl. And I don't think he's going to step away from that anytime soon.
No, of course not. But then he better be prepared to take the heat, and so should his followers. And the last segment, again, I was the defender of religion when we first met. But if you guys are going to say this is a Christian country, the conservatives are always saying that, and they're always saying we have a right to criticize this country, and they're always big on that, and militias and all that. Well, then I have a right to criticize your Christianity, don't I?
Yeah, and Michael, here, I actually don't mind Tim Tebow doing it at all, right? But I also don't mind Bill Maher's tweet. I mean, I'm amused by Tim Tebow. Every time he's like, right? I mean, it's awesome.
Silly.
It's funny.
It's funny,
but,
yeah.
Like, I mean, there's no harm in that.
There's no harm in it. But it's annoying. It's annoying that at the end of an NFL game, 12 guys or 26 guys form a circle and pray in the middle of the field. I mean, the NFL should say, and they won't, obviously, don't do that. Do it at home. Do it in the closet. This is not.
I don't even agree with that, actually.
Why?
Look, you know what? So
why do you want? If you're watching, I'm watching a football game, right? I mean, why? In that forum, there's nothing else that I don't go to a restaurant and see the restaurant owners after the closing time form in a circle and praying.
Oh, that would be awesome. I think that'd be hilarious. Or you go to a local Muslim restaurant, like a gyro shop, they close up and then they're like, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
It's a football.
He knows how to do it.
Yeah, he does.
But look, when I played football in high school, it was tradition, right? And we would all pray before the game, after the game, and say, hey, we hope nobody. We weren't like Tebow, like, Jesus, help me with that touchdown, which apparently he doesn't very often. Although he's had some great wins, and I like him as a football player in other ways too. But I wasn't religious, and I wasn't Christian. But I didn't mind. They were praying that people don't get hurt, and then thanking God for when people didn't get hurt, except we got hurt all the time.
Except people got hurt.
I know. I knew it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But to me, and that's even more objectionable because that's on school grounds. But if the Broncos are doing it, who cares?
Well, I do. I don't like. I'm watching football, and and that's. I don't. I just never understand it. I don't understand. And then why don't they, when they, the same person who goes, points to the sky after he gets a touchdown, why doesn't he just give the finger to the sky after he drops the ball? I mean, I don't understand why.
Can you imagine?
I'm sure that'll go
Damn
well.
you! Oh man, that'll start a boy.
That's the psychology of selective information processing. So you're reinforcing your beliefs by only taking in, God help me on this one, and you edit out the things that undermine
and
your
all the
beliefs.
religious people do that. The end of Malcolm X's autobiography, or not autobiography, biography, ends with him saying, "All the mistakes are mine. All praise is due to Allah." Like, so whenever you score the touchdown, it's of course Jesus or Allah that did it. When you dropped it, well, you're the jackass, because God would never make that mistake.
Right.
I'm betting that Tim Tebow's autobiography will not end with that sentence.
There's a good chance that that's the case. But getting back to Bill Maher, look, this boycott is insanity, and Fox News is just trying to stir the pot, and they love this.
Right.
And they got that bowling guy who's on Fox Business and has never done a business report in his life.
Eric Bowling got a ton of media coverage. We talked about him on Current today, and Tim Tebow is getting some coverage out of it. And when you really think about it, everyone is getting a little media attention out of this. So I feel like it's just one of those fake controversies that helps a lot of people get a lot of attention for a little while, and then it kind of fizzles out. It's a non-story.
You think it's going to hurt Bill Maher that the fundamentalist Christians are boycotting him? You think they were his big demographic before now? I mean, come on,
Boycott HBO. They
don't have ads.
Yeah, they don't have ads.
I will never go to a Reverend Franklin Graham.
I love the idea of that guy being like, God, help me boycott HBO. And he's like, I got it. And I'm constantly thinking like,
Get basic cable.
This guy doesn't even know they don't have ads.
And all these people are fine with Curb Your Enthusiasm, but Bill Maher sends out a tweet and the world has to stop. I mean, that's what's also so ridiculous.
That's absolutely true. But look, when you put the F word and saying Jesus F Tim Tebow, is it okay to get offended by that? I mean, if you're a Christian, can you say, hey, you know what? That's kind of offensive.
Or if you're a Broncos
Sure,
fan.
absolutely. I think people can say they're offended by it, and I would respect that and understand that. But boycott people, come on. That's just, I agree with Anna. That's just a publicity play.
Right. And I guess the thing that bothers me most, because I'm okay with the rest of it, is part of what Michael was pointing to. The idea that Jesus or Allah or Ganesh would care about your football game. Like, he doesn't have anything better to do, and he's like, all right, I've got to make sure Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry both run for president. president,
Yeah.
and then I got to make sure that the Broncos screw up the first 3 quarters, but then pull it out in that. You know?
Yeah. God only cares about it if he's got money on it. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to send out a tweet supporting Bill Maher. So, in fact, I'm going to tell, I'm Tebowing HBO for keeping him up, for fighting against that strong boycott of the 70 dudes.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're not even all necessarily going to do the boycott. They're just following that jackass. All right, now, here comes my final point for the week. I wrote an article about 5 years ago about why I love Santa. And I happened to tweet it out, actually, earlier this week, obviously on Christmas Day. And it wound up getting a lot of pickup, and it was very popular on Reddit, et cetera. And apparently it struck a chord with people. So what did I say to it and about it, and what can I add to it today? Well, I talked about the reason that I love Santa is that he's a fantastic American creation. It doesn't have anything to do with religion, but Santa's a great, cuddly character. He makes you feel warm inside. He doesn't start any wars. He gives out presents. He's fantastic. No one can disagree with Santa. And of course, he has absolutely nothing to do with religion. Santa wasn't anywhere near Nazareth, okay? He's not, Saint Nick of Bethlehem. No, he's a creation of mythology, basically. Or, in fact, there's a lot of the pagan tradition, of course, that has been brought over to Christianity, including the pine tree, and it's a celebration of winter solstice. Jesus was born nowhere near December 25th, if you believe the Bible, because it explains where he is. But you know what? We created this cuddly character, and Coke basically helped to hype him up, along with the polar bears, and everybody loves it. And now in Turkey, for example, they celebrate New Year's, right? And they say it's, Noel Baba, like meaning Dad Noel, who happened to come by, and guess what he does? He gives presents. Okay, so everybody loves Santa Claus. And then I was thinking, that's what I had written earlier. My addition to it this year is, with this current spate of Republicans, they probably hate Santa Claus. They're like, what kind of communist just gives out presents and doesn't make a profit off of it? What's wrong with this guy? He's a Maoist socialist. This guy's worse than Obama. And Gingrich would probably want to make the elves do janitorial work. Okay, he's like, get to work, let's go, clean up the rich people's toilets. What's the matter with you elves? That has been the point for today. I want to thank Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, Richard Eskow for Campaign for America's Future, Michael Shure, the host of the legendary show 2012. And I want to thank our point contributors, Jack Abramoff, whose new book is Capital Punishment, and it's apparently available at Amazon. By the way, you should use the TYT link. We also get a piece. Keeping it real. Dean Obeidallah can be checked out at deanofcomedy.com. Bill Maher, of course, has the show Real Time with Bill Maher, which returns to HBO with new episodes on January 13th of 2012. Thank you all for watching The Point. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.